Welcome to part 2 of my diorama, the ending of the original Planet of the Apes. Hopefully, it will look something like this. Charlton Heston on the right, the Statue of Liberty on the left, and a bunch of rocks. I'm going to call the mountains finished. How I painted these was I put down a base color. I noticed in the reference photo the first rock was a little more gray than the other, so I did a very tan gray. But for the rest, I did kind of a darker tan beige, and then thinking that the areas where the rocks have been cut and exposed is going to be more reddish or orange, I mixed up a very light yellow as well as a beige, as well as a very light red, brown, not really pure red, but red-brown, and then I painted the cut surfaces with that, really dabbed. I pretty much painted this just by dabbing the paint on. I think it looks more natural that way. You don't see brush streaks. I think overall, I have to be happy with how it looks. Honestly, it looks better in person than on the video. In the video, for some reason, it looks a lot more red and gray. In person, it's more brown and rust orange colored. But if you look at it from the Charlton Heston pounding the sand point of view, I'd say not bad. I would consider the hardest parts of this done. The statue was initially a challenge, but turned out to actually be pretty fun to do. Cutting up the mountains was not as much fun as painting them. Painting them is actually quite satisfying. So I've got those two things done. Let all that dry, and then I'm going to do the vinyl spackling to create the desert and the slope down towards the beach. And then I'm going to do sand and rocks, things like that. And the very last thing will be pouring the water. But I think I'm going to be able to do this. As is obvious, I put the vinyl spackling down. I decided to do it everywhere because I was going to have to cut down the side to create enough of a well here for ocean, and then it'll come up onto the beach. Now there's another big decision I have to make, which is, do I start to put rocks down? Because I'm going to use real rocks, I think, for the rocks that are not on the mountain. And I think the answer is going to be yes. I'm going to take that chance. I already kind of mocked it up earlier, and I'm going to put my rocks directly into the spackling because that's going to make it look the most natural when everything is said and done. If this is a mistake, I suppose I could crank them back out again and re-spackle. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to waste your time posting about that. So I just better do this right the first time, you think? So from my rock collection, I found some appropriately sized and shaped rocks to put around the statue. Looking at the reference photo, it's reasonably close. It's not perfect, but you're kind of stuck with what rocks you got on hand, right? And put them in place. They look pretty good. Oh, you might say, well, are they the right color? Doesn't matter a lot. Actually, this one here is pretty close to the right color, and there's another one behind it. But I'll probably just end up painting them all anyway to match the cliffs. But the rocks are looking pretty good. When the spackling dries, I'm going to build up the spackling a little bit around Lady Liberty here, because I think a little too much is showing. She's hidden by the rocks, but a teeny bit too much is showing. And then take a day or two to let everything dry and set. And then I have to put down the sand and the beach. And I have my ideas on how I want to do that as well. Another thing I'm doing is I'm taking the color that I painted the rocks, and I'm painting the sand around the statue. I have two kinds of sand, a coarse grain and a fine grain. This is the coarse grain. And that's looking pretty good. I'm doing the same with the rocks at the base of the mountain. That serves two purposes. One is it kind of evens out the variation in types of sand, because there is some sand that's basically black, like black pepper, and there's some that's almost clear, like quartz. And to me, that doesn't seem very realistic. So I'm at least making it, all the color of supposedly where it came from. The other major development is I brought a hot beverage into the room. And so if you want to start your timers now to the point where I accidentally knock it over, reaching for something, or turning the diorama around to get a better look at something. My own personal wager is probably about 10 minutes. So we'll see what happens. Just wanted to add to the suspense of the model building, because otherwise it's not very exciting, is it? As a testament to how bored I am and how much free time I have on my hands these days, I'm actually doing 2 dioramas at once. I've got the Planet of the Apes Statue of Liberty on the left and my Inside the T-Box tank diorama on the right. So this is going to be like an intersection video that will appear on both streams. How exciting is that? Not very exciting. None of this is very exciting. Why are you even watching? So I'm going to revert over now to the T diorama and work on the tank and maybe add a couple trees and a dead tree or two. Noting that on the Statue of Liberty diorama, I'm at the point where I've added all the coarse grained sand at the base of the mountain range and around the statue, and have painted that to match everything, and I'm letting that dry. So if that's too much excitement for you, you should maybe go down and rest, lie down or something, just to prepare yourself for the next scintillating video on either of these diorama streams. Well, I think this looks pretty good. It's not done, but what I've done is I've painted the middle part where the sand is going to be with the color gradations from the mountains and from the sea, and I think that looks good. Unfortunately, in person, this area here, which looks almost like sand on the video, in person looks like, I don't know, vinyl spackling from Menards. So I'm going to put a bunch of thin Mod Podge on the top of that and then glue down sand, which I then will paint over. And that'll make it look more like an actual beach, I think. For the ocean, what I did was I painted a stripe of dark, almost navy blue there, and a stripe of the light seafoam color, which is the same color as the Statue of Liberty base color. And then using a brush that was slightly moistened and a Q-tip, I created the gradation and darkening of the colors from left to right, from the seafoam to kind of a teal, turquoisey, to kind of a blue, to kind of a dark blue. It looks pretty good, but the pièce de résistance is going to be that I'm going to be putting liquid epoxy resin that is slightly tinted on top of that, and then creating breakers at the join, hitting the rocks and everything, and that's really gonna finish it off. And of course I have to put Charlton Heston about here. So just that much left to do. I took Mod Podge and I thinned it out with water, and then with a wide brush I brushed it on where I wanted the lighter sand desert. And then I took my fine sand and straight from the container, just let that drop onto the areas I wanted. You do want to put, a decent amount on, so the weight of the sand above is pressing on the sand below into the glue. You don't have to slather it on, but just make sure it's well covered. And then I need to let this dry for quite a few hours. And then the suspenseful part is you tilt the whole diorama up on end and let the sand that didn't glue down fall off the edge, and then see whether it worked and you go yay, or it didn't work and there's great big gaps and you go anyway. So that's the plan. After that, I'm going to take paint and I'm going to paint the top of the sand. That's another reason why the sand has got to be really well glued, because otherwise I'll be pulling sand off onto the paintbrush, and that is kind of a double whammy. You don't paint anything and you're pulling the sand off. So you want to make sure the sand is really glued down well. One idea I'm considering is taking some dull coat made from acrylic and spraying it. In case you haven't found out yet, you can't spray oil-based paints onto styrofoam or it melts. Acrylics are usually not a problem. So I may try that, and that may help some of the top layer of the sand stick together better as I paint the top with the brush. I'll probably give the brush painting a try and then spray with acrylic dull coat if that doesn't work. But making decent progress. Just gotta let this dry. I'm gonna give it a good long dry. Maybe I won't even touch it the rest of the day. That's what she said. Well, to my surprise, when I tilted the diorama and the extra sand came off, hardly any bare spots or thin spots were present. All I had to do was spot glue just a couple of small areas with sand. I think it looks quite good. I'm going to paint the sand, which will smooth it out, which will help it as far as appearing to scale, and will also make it start to match the other rocky areas a little better. I'm going to keep it lighter than those areas because that's the way it would be in real life, but also paint it slightly darker along the water's edge because wet sand is darker than dry sand. So that's the next step, but it seems to be working out. Hey now, I think this turned out pretty good. What I did was I took my darker beige paint and just a little bit of my sand-colored paint, and I painted this stripe over here to represent wet sand. That will later be covered with just a thin layer of liquid epoxy resin that I'll draw up from my ocean part. Just kind of draw up and paint that on there so it looks like wet sand. Then I did the same around the mountains, near the mountains, where that's just a little darker than the sand in the middle. Then I added a little bit more sand to that paint mixture to lighten it up, and then I painted the middle part. I used a combination of up and down like this, and then a little bit of that. And I don't know why it looks so mauve-y on the video screen, but in person it looks a lot more like sand and beach. So that's why I'm so pleased with this. The next step now is to let the paint dry on there, which won't take long. And then I'm going to pour the liquid epoxy resin in a well here. I'm going to take tape around the side and pour the resin. And I may actually show you how I do that in real time as I do it. It's always exciting because that's the step you do not want to mess up. Because once that epoxy resin is on the diorama, you know, it's there for good. Here comes another combination video because I did the water for the Statue of Liberty, Planet of the Apes diorama at the same time that I did the water for my World War I T-box diorama. We'll do Statue of Liberty first. I tinted the water with seafoam. You can see the liquid epoxy resin that I mixed together and added seafoam to, and just maybe one little drop of blue. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I just need to wait. Well, you could probably mess with it in 12 hours, but I'll wait overnight. And then I do some waves on it, and then I do the breakers, and then it's time to address Charlton Heston. So I'm pretty happy with that. The way you do liquid epoxy resin, don't know if I've ever explained it before, is you get a bottle of hardener and a bottle of resin, and you mix the two together. One nice thing is you don't have to use the whole bottle of each all at once. You could do a third of a bottle of each, and that is about what I did for this, and I had more than enough liquid epoxy resin, because you can see I've used some for this diorama, and I have that much left over. And then on the World War I added some olive green to make the water green, and I have that much left over. So if I want to top it off or change it or add a little bit, I have a little extra for a short period of time before it all starts to harden. I do wear gloves when messing with the liquid epoxy resin. Goodness knows what chemicals are in there, not the good kind. And luckily, there does not appear to be any significant leakage around the masking tape. There shouldn't be any leakage on this in the World War I. So it's a matter now of just waiting and then continuing those projects when it hardens. Like I said, it'll be reasonably firm in about 6 hours, but I usually don't mess with it until the next day. Decided to do a couple of risky moves. I didn't like how the vinyl varnish looked at this scale. It's just not big enough, the waves. And so I have decided to, number one, just use the clear caulking because I did like how that looked when made into a wave. And number 2, I have brought a hot beverage into the model room. Once again, place your bets on when this might be spilled. It does have a wider bottom cup than the last time, but don't underestimate my ability to knock things over. You can see how I've done the water. I made some waves with the caulk and seafoam and white mixture that were smaller and more continuous. And then looking back at the reference picture, I could see there are some actual breakers coming in, larger waves. So I put those in as well. Now they're not going to look nearly as prominent once it dries. I hope not. But I think it looks overall reasonably good, knowing that it's not going to look quite like this. It'll be toned down quite a bit by the end. So just wait and see what these look like, do some touching up if I need to, and then it is on to trying to figure out what kind of sign I want to put on it, and also Charlton Heston. Almost done with the water. I just want to touch it up a little bit. I put a gloss coat on top with floor gloss that I think really helps bring out the dynamic nature of the water, because when it makes it that shiny and you change your orientation, the light coming off the water moves a little bit. So it makes it look a little bit more dynamic. Gonna let all this dry, which should be easy to do because it's Friday and I'm not back until Sunday. And then I'll do Charlton Heston and a label, and then I'm done. Didn't know it at the start, but the Charlton Heston figure was about as challenging as the Statue of Liberty to get just right, maybe even more challenging in a sense. What I did was I took an HO scale figure. I had a whole pack of civilian figures, took one that was seated, bent the legs back further, and then I pulled the right arm back to make it look like he's pounding the sand. The left arm on the figure was folded across his lap, so I cut that off and took an arm from a different figure and glued that in place. It took quite a bit of experimentation to come up with the right skin color. He's supposed to be tanned, and I also wanted to build it up so you couldn't really see any join lines easily, and also make it look like he had some muscles or some an athletic build. And then maybe the trickiest part was the loincloth, which I did by taking tissue paper that I folded over on itself, so it was 2-ply now. I painted that with liquid glue, let that dry, painted that with a mainly brown but with a little green paint, cut out a strip. I glued some to the front of his waist, wrapped it around his back to the other side, and glued the other side, and then I crimped it in the front and the back. And actually, I think it looks pretty good. Scale-wise, I have to be happy with it. This HO scale is probably 1:87. I think if you look at Charlton Heston in relation to the Statue of Liberty, it doesn't look too bad. I didn't even try to do the other two figures, the girl and the horse, for a couple reasons. One reason was I didn't really have an appropriate scale horse. It was too big. The other reason is because if you have a horse and two figures, that just moves Charlton Heston from back here up here, and it just makes it look a little bit more out of scale. I think I need the Statue of Liberty way on this end and Charlton Heston way on that end. That's also why I put this rock here too. Again, looking from the front, I think you need something over here to balance out all of this over here. Once I get my sign attached, I am essentially done. I think it looks pretty good. I can't think of anything that I would want to remove and try to do again. So I'm going to basically call this finished except for the sign, but I'll go through it one more time once I have the sign attached. Then, maybe the hardest thing of all, I have to give this up and give it to my daughter to take to her apartment because she's the one who requested it. But, I just might build one for myself. Here's the completed piece of the last scene of the Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston on the left and the half-buried Statue of Liberty on the right, though you probably didn't need me to tell you that. Now, Charlton Heston is admittedly a little out of scale. He's 1:87 and the statue is 1:225. So if you don't have a good tolerance for things being slightly out of scale, there is another way to look at this, which would be to turn it this direction and display it this way, because there you have kind of a scene from the film showing Charlton Heston in the foreground and the half-buried Statue of Liberty in the background in the undefinable distance. So if you want to do a forced perspective that keeps things perhaps more in scale, one could display it this way. For now, since my daughter says she doesn't have room in her apartment for this piece, I'm going to display it on the corner edge of a table so one could look at it from either direction. Another way to look at it would be from behind, where you can see just a little bit of the statue and Charlton Heston in the background, which recreates the initial shot from the film when you first see the statue. I wouldn't display it that way. It's just interesting to look at it from that perspective. Anyway, it was fun to build. I learned a couple things along the way, not just the friends I made, but also that one can use a cheap hardware store clear caulk to make ocean waves, and if you add a little bit of cheap acrylic paint, either seafoam or white or a combination thereof, you can make foaming waves and breakers on the shore, much cheaper than you can if you buy things specifically from a hobby store. Anyway, it was a great project. Thanks to my daughter for giving me the idea. It's on to the next project, completion of my T-Box World War I diorama. So until then, have a good one.